Message from the Speaker.
Dear Speaker Davidson, as you know, I have been selected by the Butler County Central Committee to fill the vacancy on the Butler County Board of County Commissioners. My appointment necessitates my informing you of my intention to resign my position as a member of the Ohio General Assembly, effective upon the adjournment of the House session scheduled for Tuesday, October 14th, 1997. While I'm excited about the prospects of continuing my service to the people of Butler County closer to home, I will miss the legislature and all of its wonderful members very much. To you and my colleagues, I say thank you for nearly 23 years of rewarding and satisfying relationships and experiences. You have all given me memories that I will treasure for the rest of my life. Sincerely, Michael A. Fox, 59th District, State Representative.
The question before the House is, shall the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Johnson.
Davidson, members of the House, this is a time which when we have members leaving, particularly those members that have given so much to this body, it's difficult to give a speech that's adequate for all the years and all the effort that's been put in. But Mike Fox has served the people of Butler County for nearly a quarter of a century, and he has dramatically improved the lives of the people of his district and also the people of the state of Ohio. And I know how much this place has meant to Mike Fox, how much his family means to him. And I know that this is a tough time for Mike Fox and for us. He's substantially been active in many areas, including the champion of education, primary and secondary and higher education, the level of technology. I've been visiting school districts in my area of the state. They have been touched by Mike Fox's efforts in technology. He's worked to strengthen child support enforcement laws. He's was the earliest and probably the strongest promoter of workfare in the state of Ohio. He has promoted and created the creation of charter schools, and I might say with great vigor he has done this. And anyone who has ever seen a Mike Fox amendment has heard of the transportation improvement districts. I've known Mike Fox even before we came here to the legislature, and I remember a person I went to high school with was going to college at Miami University, and he told me, you got to meet this guy named Mike Fox. I mean, this guy is really on the move, and he's really loves politics, and I finally met him. And about 26 years ago, over 26 years ago, Mike. And we were roommates during part of this time that he served in the legislature. And I could tell you about Max the dog. You know how you hate dogs that jump up on you? This dog didn't even have to jump up. It was a big English sheepdog. And it would come over, and it was a cute, and it was a great dog, but you know, you'd be sitting there and you'd feel this wetness on your hand. It'd be that dog, just not jumping up, just putting its chin on your arm. I could tell about the time that you know, Mike would open up his car and unload his suitcases and bring them in to bring in his bags into our apartment. And this one time that, you know, and you know Mike, he had some McDonald's wrappers back there and some few things. Anyway, he came in. The next morning, he went out to get in his car to, well, let me say, the next day he went out and opened up his car door, and a cat jumped out of there that somehow had just kind of wandered in while he had the doors open and before he had closed them on his final trip of bringing things in the apartment. He was a person that you know, if somebody from Butler County or from his area of the state or one of his acquaintances needed a place to stay all night, he always made room for them, but he was that type of guy. And I have in here, Mike, that I was going to say the only group that I can think of that would be glad that you're leaving is LSC. Because, you know, Mike has introduced at least 40 bills this session. And, but even LSC, on a serious note, I was talking to a couple of members of LSC, and they said, I said, you know, this Mike Fox, boy, he has so much work for you to do. And their response, and you would appreciate this, Mike, is that, no, Mike appreciates what we do for him. He's been known to send us notes, to ask us to out for lunch to show his appreciation. And I think that's something that all of us could learn from. He asked them to do a lot of work, but he according to them, showed his appreciation. Well, he has diverse interests and has many worthy causes, and he's been recognized by the Nursing Home, Speech and Hearing Coalition, Primary and Secondary Education, Leadership, Vocational Education, Education of the Handicapped Children, the National Taxpayers Union, Miami University's President's Award, and many, many other groups. Your career has touched the lives of citizens throughout this state, and I consider it a great honor to have served with you. You'll be missed by the people of Ohio and by the Ohio House of Representatives.
Question is, shall the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Jacobson.
Thank you, Speaker Davidson. Since I've been in the House of Representatives the past a little more than 5 years, it's been my privilege to sit next to Representative Fox. I have to remember, though, that on my first day out of the chamber, we had the opportunity to vote on some issues, and of course I didn't know much about what I was doing. There are some who still think I don't, or think I still don't, but at the time I was very interested in what my neighbors had to say, and Representative Fox being the one who seemed to want to volunteer the most, I ended up voting with him on a regular basis, and as we were walking out that day, Representative Van Vyven walked by and said, "That was a total mistake you made sitting down there, and it's going to infect you." So it took me 2 years to live him down. He was right, of course. But you know, when I think of Mike Fox, one of the things I think of is, you know, his instincts are right, and we all know that. But how he thinks of a story at the beginning of each point he's going to make, he has a story. I don't know where they sit. The stories are not on the bottom of the desk. They're not written down anywhere. You know more stories about fictitious people in the history of the world that the rest of us tried desperately to retell at home. I still can't figure out whether or not the lady who was trying to avoid the guy in the devil costume, did she get out the window, or when did she turn around and what did she say? And it never works. No one ever laughs. But I have to tell you that when I think of Mike Fox, I think of one story in particular, and that is a story he tells about a little girl who desperately wanted something as a present, and she went out to the barn and she saw a pile of manure, and she jumped up and down and hopped through the pile and threw it up and down and just went all through it. And they asked her, "Well, what are you doing that for, Susie?" And it's because she said, "Well, there's so much manure around here, there has to be a pony somewhere." And when you look, see, it doesn't work. I still don't get the last part of this. But that story to me sums up everything there is to say about Mike Fox and his work over the past 25 years. You probably are all wondering how I'm going to turn this into a compliment. But let me say that there is no one who's had to wade through more manure and at the same time, in 23 years, has always looked for the pony. I mean, it's amazing when you think about it. How many things that Mike Fox has pushed where he's lost here or gotten forgotten elsewhere or something's happened in the middle of it, but yet he continued to believe in them. For the rest of us, it's like Charlie Brown in the football. At a certain point, you say, "I'm not going to run against the football ever again." But for Mike, it's never the end. He has more optimism, more enthusiasm, more dedication to what he believes in. It's been inspiring for me. And I hope that only in the future, we can continue to work through these issues and actually keep with the same enthusiasm. God knows it's more than I usually have. Mike, you've been creative beyond anything I could imagine. Whenever I have an idea that we can't solve, you have the answer for it. You introduced it as a bill 10 years ago. You can't find it, but it's somewhere in the pile. There's no one I would rather have with me in a fight. The problem, we can't predict where you are. Half the time you disappoint us, but that's because you have your principles and you're sticking to them, no matter if the rest of us are confused. But I have to say that one thing was true about Mike. There is something in politics that makes us all want to tell our constituents that we're taking care of the problem. But down deep, we know we're not. Down deep, we know that the problem's not going to go away, and no matter what we say, no matter what we do, no matter how we vote, all we can do is hope to manage the mess. Mike Fox tries to solve the problems. And if there is anyone in the state that I have worked with in the time that I've been in politics, 19 years now, Mike Fox is the one person that I truly believe has the ability to solve the problems of Ohio. To me, governors come and go, senators retire to join the staffs at Ohio State, legislative leaders get buildings named after them, but Mike Fox leaving the House of Representatives is, to me, the greatest loss for the citizens of the state of Ohio. But of course, it's a new opportunity for Butler County, and no doubt we will have to examine every bill carefully for the special demonstration project for Butler County that will now be contained in every piece of legislation. Mike, as you leave us, I have two wishes for your future. May you always find another Lucy to hold the football, and may there be lots of ponies in your future manure piles. Good luck to you.
Question is, shall the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Motley.
Thank you, Speaker Davidson. That's a very difficult speech to follow, but of course it's a very difficult career to follow. I want to share a couple quotes from others. I had the honor of attending Representative Fox's swearing in, although I guess it's not official till he files the oath with the clerk of the commission to the Butler County Commission. And the young man who, as a teenager, had run his first campaign, emceed that event, and made a couple remarks I thought were rather telling. First, he said that the appointment should be portrayed in an editorial cartoon in which the two remaining incumbent commissioners are Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny waiting on the dock as the crate containing the Tasmanian devil is being unloaded. This was from one of his friends. This is a longtime friend and associate saying this. Butler County has no idea what is inside that whirlwind of energy that is about to be landed in its midst. He then went on from that to say that he also was someone, having run his first campaign, who thought that Mike practically walked on water, that he was just the best imaginable political leader, the best imaginable legislator. And then as he worked closely with him, he found out to his disenchantment that Mike wasn't perfect, that he had a string of bonehead ideas and approaches to things, that he was late for meetings, that he was running on Senate time without ever having served in that body. And yet he went on to say that despite all of those flaws, and I'll just add that I'm reminded a little bit of a quote about Winston Churchill once. One of the generals that worked with him during World War II said, "Winston is often right, but when he is wrong, oh my God." Well, Mike Fox is often right. It's an oh my God when he's wrong, but he is often right. Governor Voinovich said at the funeral of former Speaker Reif that he thought that Vern Reif was the greatest legislator in Ohio history. Well, it's real hard to compete with the legacy of someone that sat in that chair or anyone that's presided over either house, because they're going to have more influence over more events than those of us that are out here on this floor. But I will say one thing. I defy almost anyone to find someone that hasn't sat in that chair, that has their fingerprints on more pieces of major legislation affecting this state over their career than Mike Fox. And most of that he achieved while his party was in the minority in this House. I don't know that anyone, anywhere in Ohio history, will ever be able to make that claim. So for persistence, for dedication, and for effectiveness, whether we always agree with his ideas, and of course we can't because he had so many of them, whether we always agree with his tactics, and of course we can't because sometimes he got something done when we weren't looking, The fact is that by almost any measure, it's hard to find someone that was a more effective legislator over his career than Mike Fox. Mike, I salute you, and as I said, I can hardly wait to find out what that whirlwind of energy does in Butler County as soon as that crate is open. Thank you.
The question is, shall the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Fox.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Well, maybe you on that side of the aisle are going to miss Mike, but on this side of the aisle, we're not going to miss him. I mean, who would like to sit in Finance Committee and you got a budget bill this thick and you got Mike Fox amendments this thick? I mean, then you get through that process and you might accept or defeat his amendments there, and you come to the House floor to vote on the budget and you found out Mike got more amendments in there than you did when we were in control over here. I mean, then you get that done, you go through the Transportation Committee, and the same thing all over again. But all seriousness, ladies and gentlemen, there's no individual that cared about kids than Mike Fox. I can remember when we did the child abuse report, and we had meetings all over the state. Of course, Mike and I are at opposite corners of the state. Didn't matter where we were at, Mike was there. That's what he took. He took the time because he cared. We all hope that we reach that plateau that Mike's already at. The care for our constituents, and not only our constituents, but for other residents of this great state of ours that we call Ohio. You know, we've heard in the last few farewell speeches about the times that were, and wish we had those times again. It was how when we had problems, whether it be a workers' comp problem and Representative Corbin and I worked, or whether it was a child problem and Mike and I worked, those are the times that were. And those times are going to be hard to replace. Mike, if you ever need anything in Northeast Ohio, don't be afraid to give a call, because you certainly have helped me and others with your kindness and the way you cared about people. And no one can take that away from you. God bless you.
The question is, shall the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Heininger.
Thank you, Speaker Davison. It's with really mixed emotions that I rise for the first time in sending my farewells to one of our colleagues that have departed. Just mentioned to Representative Carey, it seems like we do this, we're either welcoming a new member or sending off a great family member, it seems like every other week when we're in session. But the first time that I rise, it's a privilege for me to rise for Mike Fox. I also want to quote, like Motley, something from Winston Churchill that reminds me of Mike Fox. Winston Churchill was once asked why he entered politics. And he said, ambition, pure, 100% unadulterated ambition. And they asked him several years later, why he stayed in politics for such a long time. As you know, Mike joined this chamber, I think, when he was 25, 26. They asked Mr. Churchill why he stayed in politics. He said, anger, pure, 100% unadulterated anger. And you know, Mike has an angry streak for the status quo, and for people hurting and for problems, and believes that he can step in and intervene and help make someone's quality of life better. I'll never forget one of the first pieces of advice that I was given as freshmen, you know, with the advent of term limits, those old cliches and those old sayings of be seen, don't be heard, or sit back and learn the ropes for 7 or 8 years before you start taking a key role. Those sorts of pieces of advice were thrown out with my class, being the first class coming in after post-term limits. The new piece of advice at LSC, well, actually it wasn't LSC, but I think it was at an LSC seminar that I heard this, was be very, very careful about getting on one of Mike Fox's bills as a co-sponsor. That was the new standard motto that freshmen were supposed to be aware of, and that's because his bills are often a quagmire of complexity. But as it may take me a little bit longer, but once I started to find out what was inside Mike Fox's bills, and what was driving those and his passion behind those, more times than not only did I agree with him, but found myself bucking that advice and going on as a co-sponsor. We certainly are losing a legislative giant today. and on many, many issues, he truly is a giant amongst pygmies. And as term limits begin to take its effect, we in the state of Ohio are going to sorely miss leaders like Mike Fox. Mike, I want to let you know that I am very fortunate to have considered you to be a mentor. My constituents are fortunate. The entire state of Ohio is fortunate that you have allowed so many people in this chamber to stand on your shoulders as a giant to help us see the issues a little bit more clearly. And I just want to say thank you, God bless you, and we'll miss you.
Question is, should the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Gerberry.
Thank you very much, Speaker Davidson. It's not often that I get up and say goodbye to people on the floor. I think this is maybe the third time in 15 and a half years, and I think maybe this is the first Republican that I've stood up for. Sometimes in the middle of the night when Bill Thompson was leaving, it was a little difficult and thought that maybe I shouldn't stand up. But professionally, maybe from where I sit, I'm kind of glad to see him leave. Because I didn't always agree with him. Matter of fact, he was a genuine pain in you-know-what. As I served as chairman, he was the ranking minority member. And I trying to think of adjectives to describe Mike Fox, and some of them have been used, but as chairman, he was challenging. And he continuously challenged the chair with amendments and maneuvers. And when I was chairman, I was fortunate because I won. And when he became chairman, he had a unique perspective as being chairman because he didn't care if he won, because his mind was a bank of ideas, and he would propose, I would sit there and shake my head. He'd propose these amendments to bills, and they'd be defeated by everybody. And he'd laugh. And he'd say, hey, let's go for another one. And he did. He would go down the line. And I thought pretty good. I said, hey, we're doing okay here tonight, But he didn't even, because it was ideas. It was presenting ideas. And I have to respect that. I was amazed when he would put bills on the agenda and watch them lose. That wasn't traditional thinking, that you put a bill on the agenda to have it fail. But Mike was different. Oh, he was different. He's the senior member of the House Education Committee today. When he departs, I become the senior member. I'm still a former chairman, and unfortunately so were you. But we had fun together, and we fought the battles. He was persistent and is persistent. He was consistently good sometimes and consistently bad, because I disagreed with some of the things that he stood for. Creative, someone used that adjective, and as I said, a bank of ideas. Extremely articulate. Different than Art Wolkowski, different than Joe Vukovich, but very articulate. And we appreciated that type of expression on the House floor. A scholar, no question, extremely bright. And more importantly than anything, a gentleman. A gentleman, a good father, a good husband, and a person who cared about people. And that's what the legislature is really all about. And Mike, I'm going to miss you. I really am. It's been my pleasure to have had the opportunity to serve with you, and I wish you well. I wish you well as the two other people you're going to sit with on that commission. But may God bless you, and the best of luck for Butler County and you and your family.
Question is, shall the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Krebs.
Thank you, Speaker Davidson. I could tell many tales, but we are on videotape. But I will tell one true story, which I think for those of you, there's like 40 of us who have been elected since 1992. And this, I think, is very instructive of how things were done before the process became open and everybody could participate. You've all heard how Mike got all these amendments through and everything. January, and I won't name all the names to protect the guilty, But January 1993, I'm sitting in that back row, and a colleague sitting next to me turns to me and says, very innocently, now keep in mind, we'd only been in office now for about 2 months, says, "Why does Butler County have all of these airplanes?" And I look at our colleague and I respond, "Huh?" And she says, "Why does Butler County have all these airplanes?" And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And she says, "Every time I turn around, Mike Fox has a new pilot project for Butler County." And if you hadn't been here and had to watch him struggle to get great ideas, the ideas that everybody should have immediately been signing off on, and get them through only as a pilot project because we were in the minority, that was the best he could get done at that point in time. And if you remember, Mike, the things I said about Mary Law and Joyce Thal, about the Christians in church and chickens in the courthouse, they apply to you too. Good luck.
Question is, shall the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Corbin.
Speaker Davidson, I'm going to miss Mike Fox. Just like Representative Boggs said a few minutes ago, he used to irritate the hell out of me when all those amendments came at the last minute in finance. I got so disgusted. And just like Representative Boggs, I got so irritated because he got them through. He wouldn't come to committee. He wouldn't come to any of the subcommittees. But the last day when we were doing amendments, Mike Fox was there with his stack of amendments and he got them through. And you know, some of them even were worthwhile. I consider Mike Fox to be the most frustrating and the most brilliant member of this House. Frustrating because of the way he's handled himself, the way he's done things in the past, and brilliant because of the quality that he's brought to the process and all the things he tried to do. Even though I, as I say, get upset with him a little while, I remember during the Rules Committee a couple years ago, we were sitting in Rules and we were just about finished, and Mike came up with some cockamamie amendment. Remember that, Randy? And I said, what in the heck, what is he trying to get this cockamamie amendment through? And I think Lee Leonard printed it, if I'm not mistaken. And I came to work the next morning and I was cockamamie for the day because I had been criticized, I've been quoted as saying something about Mike Fox. I don't know of anybody that I'm more glad to see leave than Mike Fox because I get his office. And when we moved into the Rife Tower, the first office I wanted was Mike Fox's office. Tom and I were next in line. And so you know who got the office. And I've been sitting there jealously hoping to have that office, and now, Mike, I have it. And I want to say that Rachel was in there this morning working with me on a bill, and she says, gosh, this looks completely different when I was here. And any of you who've been in Mike Fox's office, you know what a neat and clean office he always maintained. Very nice. Mike, I certainly am going to miss you. I hated you and I loved you. You frustrated me and I admired you. And I wish you all the best in the world. We're going to really miss you.
Question is, shall the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Speaker Davidson, members of the House. When I think about the 2.5 years that I've had an opportunity to work with Representative Fox, there are several things that come to mind. I think, as Representative Boggs mentioned, I think about Mike's passion for helping kids, every kid, get a quality education. His concern for that area and that issue is probably second to no one's. I also think about the ability, kind of the uncanny ability Mike had to take command of any situation he was in. It didn't matter if it was could be a dinner meeting, could be a committee meeting, could be right here on the House floor, but when Mike stood up to speak, kind of like the old E.F. Hutton commercials, people listened. And that's I think, a testimony to his eloquence, his intelligence, and just the talent he had for communicating the ideas that he believed were important and the ideas that he think mattered to the people he represented. I guess, though, the two things that come to mind most are when I think about Mike and the opportunity I've had to work with him in just a short time. I think mostly about his willingness to fight. When I first got here, I don't pretend to have all the answers, but one of the things I thought was important was where you fell on the political perspective and spectrum. Were you Were you conservative? Were you liberal? Where did you fall on that line? And after being here a while, I've figured out, I think, that it's not so important whether you're conservative or liberal, but it's, are you willing to fight? I mean, don't get me wrong. I wish all of you were conservative, but the point is. But the point is, Mike has always been willing to stand up and fight, and that's something I admire, and I think the people he represents appreciate that. He has ideas, and he wants to stand up and see those things become law, and that's something I think is a quality we can all learn from. And then finally, just the fact that he's been a friend of mine. I appreciate the influence he's had on my life in a positive way. I hope that maybe I've done a little bit in the other direction and helped him as well. But I'm going to miss him, and Mike, God bless you and your family.
Question is, the letter of resignation be accepted. Representative Cates.
Thank you, Speaker Davidson. A few weeks ago, when we were going through the selection process in Butler County to fill the commissioner's seat, Mike was concerned about the timing process, about when he could leave here and go take a seat in commissioner. He said he was having a hard time resigning. And I said, well, I think there's probably quite a few people in Columbus that can help you with that. And be more than happy to do that. I've known Mike Fox for 14 years, and most of it has been outside the legislature. And I can't elaborate too much on all the kind words been said about Mike, because he does care about people. He is willing to share the stage. And I remember back to the 88 Republican presidential campaign that year, Bush Quayle. That's the one we won. And Mike Fox and I ran the Bush Quayle effort in Butler County that year. And even though he was a state legislator, he never, ever shied away from sharing the stage with people. And I was nobody at that time. And made sure we participated in events. Mike always did things in a big fashion. That year in the campaign, we always had to fight major political stars going to Cincinnati and Dayton for TV exposure. And that year, Mike Fox managed to bring to Butler County Pat Robertson, Howard Baker, Marilyn Quayle, and George Bush. And I can't think of another county our size that got those many visits there. But it's just a testament to Mike's willing to do things in a big nature. And the following year, another thing that I always remember about Mike, for those who are familiar with the Cincinnati River Fest on Labor Day, big fireworks show down the river. Mike asked me and my new wife to, she's my only wife also, my wife, we just got married. I wanted to clarify that. We just got married. He had invited Jill and me to go down to watch the fireworks. And he told us where to meet him. And it was more than just watching the fireworks. Mike got us on the doggone barge that they shoot the fireworks off of in the river. And Mike, I'm going to tell you something, I haven't been to the river fence since then. But that was truly a memorable experience. Now, I got a funny story I got to share with you, because I just had this verified with Mike, so I know it's true. But back before the House occupied the Rife Tower, all the House members were huddled over here in the House Annex. And most of the offices had no windows. They were just mounted cubicles and so forth. And we all have heard about Mike's passion to want to work late into the night to do things. Well, there was this one occasion that Mike was working late at night. And of course, there was like one master switch for the lights for the entire floor they were working on there. Mike was back in his cubicle there working away and fell asleep. And the janitorial staff came in there to clean out all the waste baskets and so forth. Little did they know that Mike was back there, so they turned the lights off. Well, somewhere in the middle of the night, Mike wakes up, pitch black, and he says, "Oh my God, I've gone blind, I can't see." He confessed his entire soul to the Lord Jesus Christ that night there to get his eyesight back. Mike, all of us have little characteristics and idiosyncrasies up here, and I guess one thing that I will miss up here, and something you're not going to get a chance to do, and it is, I can remember the 2 years I've been here, that the gentleman from Butler County rises to be recognized. He always goes, "Move to amend." Mike, we wish you well as Commissioner of Butler County, and I appreciate your friendship these last 14 years, and I wish you well.
Question is, the letter of resignation be accepted. Representative Healy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think Mike and I came down here about the same time, so I've had the opportunity to observe his career in the House of Representatives. And I can certainly remember when he came down and entered as a very bright young man who quickly became a loose cannon on the deck. But you know, the interesting thing about it is, and I think this says a lot about term limits, is I've had the opportunity to watch Mike grow over the years. And he took his energy and his brilliance, and he learned how to channel it into achievement. And you know, with term limits, we're going to have some very bright people come to the legislature, but they're never going to have an opportunity to learn that, and that's unfortunate. So I doubt if we'll see the likes of a Mike Fox here very soon. You know, he took on a lot of controversial issues. If he believed in something, everybody in the world could tell him that they don't agree, but he would fight for it if he believed in it. And so when you take on those kind of controversial issues, it's called leadership. It's easy to sit back and do nothing and not offend anybody, but Mike believed with what he was doing, and he would pursue it. And I don't think there's anybody that's ever agreed with him 100% of the time in here. That would be very difficult because he managed to draw opposition from every side of the aisle at one time or another. But on a personal note, I'll certainly miss Mike. There goes half the band. I don't know if some of you don't even know it, but Mike is a very good songwriter. He's a good guitar player, and he's a good singer. And we used to get together. I play a little keyboard guitar, and Mike and I had a lot of good times jamming together at Salt Fork and other places. And so, Mike, I don't know who your replacement is, but you're going to have to teach him a few chords on the guitar and make sure he can sing before he comes up, or her, whatever it might be. But we'll certainly miss you. There was a time, in fact, Mike and I had played music a number of times together, and we were thinking about the possibility of him and I having a joint fundraiser. Remember that, Mike? But then we thought, well, we'd probably both be expelled by our caucuses, so we didn't do it. But we were going to entertain at our own fundraiser. You know, that probably was a good idea, Mike. We should have done that. But I'll miss you, partner. I'll tell you, you've been a good friend and a great legislator, and good luck to you in your new endeavors.
Question is, shall the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Bender.
Thank you, Speaker Davidson. Mike, I've already sent you a personal note telling you how much I've admired and enjoyed working with you, but just a few observations for my colleagues. When Mike took over the Education Committee back in January of '95, our meetings started to go till 10, 11, midnight. I think a couple even went till 1 or 2 a.m., as I recall, and we began to call it the Sleeping Bag Committee, namely, bring your sleeping bag. But I do recall in that year, when you assumed the chair, that Mike Shoemaker and I used to sit in the back row and try to figure out how to keep up with you. Your energy level is phenomenal. Your intellectuality is amazing. And indeed, that energy level and that enjoyment that you have of the forum, of the discussion, I think is one of your true attributes. And you taught many of us how to use that forum. I know your name came up on October 2nd back in Lorain County when a teacher came up and said, I understand that Representative Fox is leaving the House. And she recalled on Senate Bill 230, remember the panel of teachers that came down? And you queried them at length, and she remembered how tough you were with your questioning, but then again, I think we made that a better bill, if you recall. So I personally will miss your 4 amendments and the discussion that goes with them. I will, of course, miss your friendship and, of course, the many ideas that I think you led us through. Thank you and good luck.
Question is, shall the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Beatty.
Thank you very much, Speaker, members of the House. One of the things that you do in this body is try and learn from other people, and I remember when our side of the aisle became the minority, one of the things that I did was to kind of look back and see where what the successful people had done previously that were in the minority. And of course, I looked at the amendment process that Mike Fox had followed for years and years. And last session, I tried to do a lot of amendments myself. Now, the only difference was, Mike, you got yours through. I didn't get hardly any through. But the one thing I wanted to say to you, and I've said this to you privately, I think that outside of this process, when you evaluate people, I think that, in my opinion, you're a real man. And let me tell you a couple of things, and I've said this to you privately. It takes a real man to steer the course to stay in this body. And Mike, all of us know that you've taken a lot of abuse. And I say this as a compliment to you, Mike, because there's an awful lot of people that would have said, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. You stayed, you steered the course, and from a lot of us, we appreciate your courage. And we also appreciate the fact that even if we disagreed with you, Mike, we knew that when you made a decision, it was a sincere decision for something that you wanted to try and do, rather than just a, quote, political decision, unquote. And there's an awful lot of us that appreciate the fact that over the years, you've stuck with and supported people that have had less than you, supported people and their causes that weren't your clones, supported minority issues, supported the little people. You've always been there on those issues, and we really appreciate that. And even outside of this process, I've got a lot of respect for you as a person, and I think that a lot of us can learn a lot from you. Thanks, Mike.
Question is, should the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Reed.
Thank you, Speaker Davidson. In my first term, I had the office, it was 2 offices down from Representative Fox, and I sat 2 seats over from him, both cases next to Jeff. And I can remember the first time that I talked to Mike. Mike said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a lawyer. And many of you know Mike doesn't really like lawyers that much. And the next thing he said was, well, what kind of law do you do? And I mentioned domestic relations, which little did I know I hit one of his very hot buttons. And then, of course, somehow the conversation came around that I used to be married to a judge, which was really a hot button with him. But in the course of all of that, he became really my friend. And I mean, I can think of all the things that I've been through in the 5 years I've been here, and there have certainly been some controversial moments in my life here, but always, Mike's door was always open, and no matter who was in there, I would go in and he'd say, Marilyn, he'd get rid of whoever was there, he'd close the door, and we'd have those heart-to-heart talks. And they were very special times for me. They were a great deal of comfort for me. Even though many times we disagreed on what I was doing and what he felt, he was always there as a friend. He was very, very special, and I will always appreciate that. I wish him the greatest success when he goes to Butler County. I know they're very fortunate to get him, and I will miss him dearly. Thank you.
Question is, should the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Sykes.
Speaker Davidson, ladies and gentlemen, there's really no words that could express the level of contribution that Mike Fox has made to this body and to the citizens here in the state of Ohio. He is truly a great guy, but that was not my first impression. About 14, 15 years ago, when I first here as in my first term, the first bill I had on the floor, I was a little nervous, and at that time it was a lot of us Democrats from Summit County. We all sit together in one little section here in the center. I sit right beside Vernon Cook, who was the Assistant Majority Floor Leader at the time, and he was giving me pointers on how to handle this. He talked with me before session to make sure I had my floor speech together, and then at the floor, he advised me that there's going to be several Republican amendments. Of course, we're going to defeat them all. You're to stand up after they make their motion to amend and make a very brief statement, but make it clear to the members, to the Democrats, that you're opposed to the amendment. And I made my speech, and there were several Republican members that stood and offered their amendments, and they were all defeated. And then Mike Fox stood. He rose and he made a very eloquent speech, and he spoke as usual for about 35 or 40 minutes. And I turned to Vern Cook, and the adrenaline was pumping heavy, and I wanted to respond. And Vern Cook said, make it short, just let the members know that you're opposed to it. And I stood up and I and I opposed it, and the amendment passed. And my heart dropped, and I turned to Vernon Cook and startled, and he said, "Boy, he must have a good aide." At that point, I hated Mike Fox. And I said I was going to get him. But little did I know that that was just one of 50 or 60 amendments he was going to get in on me over the course of my 15-year career. Not just bills I had on the floor, but as chairman of several committees, and in the finance committee, he has gotten tons and tons of legislation through, and I've never been able to get him yet. The only thing I can do now is vote to get rid of him, and I'm glad to do that.
Question is, should the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Prentice.
Thank you, Speaker Davidson. I know change is constant, but I hate this kind of change. I really worry, Michael, about people who everybody likes. I used to, and I still live by, if you ain't doing nothing, everybody loves you. And I would like to just challenge those folks in this chamber who feel real comfortable with everybody liking them. You started out, I mean, it's interesting. Everybody's got this story to tell about how this love-hate relationship with you. It's interesting because you were a legend for me. When I was on the State Board of Education, about 1985, I really said that, I mean, who was driving education at that time and still is was Senator Watts and Michael Fox, Representative Michael Fox, and I said, I want to be just like them. But I thought we were on different pages, and sometimes we still are. I came over here, and you can remember that famous or infamous quote in The Plain Dealer, and I said, he has a way, folks, of making blankety blank taste like chocolate. And with his silver tongue, and so Michael has said to me since then, how do you know? Which I thought was pretty good. But if you go into his office, you will see that plan on the wall. And I sat there one day and I looked at this plan, charter schools, independence. I mean, he had a whole conservative, for those of us, he had a whole conservative outline of things that he has systematically chipped away in terms of the education system in the state of Ohio. I applaud you for hard work. You got to respect that. I also applaud you for allowing me as ranking minority to participate fully in the education committee. I don't know who's coming after you, Michael, but I would hope that they would give me that same kind of play. It was great talking to you, working with you. And that speech, what was that speech? Are we going to lock up these chumps, these turkeys? That is still yet to come. Maybe someone else will carry that legislation. I think it's the deadbeat dads, lock them up. But I've admired you over the years. It's been clearly a love-hate relationship. Many times we're on different ends of the spectrum, but we always respect folks who work hard, and I've appreciated working with you, and I will miss you. I can't understand why you made the decision to do that instead of this, but maybe you'll tell me that tonight.
Question is, should the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Jones.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members of the House of Representatives. I've only served in this body for 10 months, so I can't claim to know all of the institutional history and all of the nuances of this particular body. However, I have been here long enough to recognize those whose contributions to the House of Representatives have been extraordinary and unique. And I've certainly been here long enough to appreciate just how Representative Fox can both charm and frustrate, and how through his efforts he can exasperate you and at the same time leave you extraordinarily impressed with his abilities. Jay, like you, I too was warned about Representative Fox early on. I can remember, I think it was just before this 122nd General Assembly got underway when Representative Boggs passed out for the new members of the House a list in which we were to write the committees that we wanted to serve on. And of course, everybody writes finance, and then after that, I wrote education because that had been an issue I talked about during the campaign, and by golly, that was the #1 issue as far as I was concerned in the state of Ohio. But I was quickly told, are you sure you want to serve on the Education Committee? Are you willing to give up Tuesday evening, Tuesday night, and Wednesday morning to serve on that committee? And I was persistent and insistent, and I said, yes, absolutely, that's what I want to do. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, I ended up serving on the committee. And early on in the process, it probably was after the first or second meeting, Representative Fox asked me if I'd be willing to help out on this drug testing bill that he had, House Bill 7. He said, Peter, I really want to work with you on this. It's so important. You could help so much. Well, I think that was a pretty clever way of just getting some of the allegiance and friendship of a first-term Democrat, but it was smart. It was good. And I fell for it. What the heck? And so I worked with Representative Fox a bit on the bill. And there came a time at which he and I disagreed on one significant point. And so I offered an amendment in the committee, and we debated it vigorously for probably an hour at least, and lo and behold, the amendment passed. And you know, so many people, particularly when they're in leadership on a committee or that, and my being a first-termer, would have taken that personally. But Mike enjoyed the good fight, enjoyed a good, strong, rigorous debate on an issue, smiled about it, joked with me about it, and bounced right back with another amendment or two on his own bill, I believe. Now, but as much as I enjoyed working with him in that respect, there's one discussion that I'll never forget, and it occurred late one night after the Education Committee had met, and I guess that's kind of redundant, late one night after the Education Committee had finished meeting. And we talked about a variety of things. We talked about theater, and I think a play I had written, and we talked about movie making, and a script that Representative Fox had drafted, and we talked about life and marriage, and we just went through the whole panoply of ordinary, fundamental human concerns and issues. And I think so much about that and how that was one of the most important discussions, one of the most heartwarming discussions I've had with any member of this body during my 10 months here. Mike, I'll be disappointed, obviously, to see you go for many reasons, one of which was I have a bill, HB 492, that you said we were going to move quickly through the committee, and now you'll no longer be there for that to happen at the Education Committee. But more important than that, I'll miss your friendship. You know, it's certainly inconsequential to me that you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat, and that you're from Butler County and I'm from Cuyahoga County. Frankly, none of those things make any difference whatsoever. You're simply a great legislator. You're a wonderful chair of the committee. And more importantly to me, you've been a great friend and role model, and we'll miss you.
Question is, should the letter of resignation be accepted? Representative Batchelder.
Speaker Davidson, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is indeed a difficult time for me to accept the notion that Mike isn't going to be here anymore. He and I have had our ups and downs. I was trying to recall this morning how long it was I hadn't spoken to him at one point. I believe it was 11 years. And it was late 1980 until... But at the end of the day, when we started talking again, we've had a wonderful relationship ever since then. Actually, I always thought of Mike in a sort of an athletic context as being the legislative equivalent of Rocky Marciano. You'll call, he was a world heavyweight champion, and he retired without ever having been knocked down as world heavyweight champion. Well, Mike has really been bloody on occasion, and the ring has been messy when he finished up, sometimes messy for his best friends and allies. But at the end of the day, he's never suffered a knockdown. He is a very special person in that regard. When I was thinking about this change that Mike is making, of course, my first instinct was how much I understood what he was doing, because I have been gone from my family for 29 years, at least 2 nights a week, and after a while that begins to pall. I'd like to go on longer without term limits, but that nonetheless is the case. And I know that Mike has youngsters at home who are reaching that age where a father is particularly important to them. But I was thinking of how many people across the state of Ohio he had affected, other people's children, for the good, for the benefit of their long-term success and education. I remember when he came to me on SchoolNet Plus, he'd figured out how much money he could get out of the budget. I see the director sitting up there laughing. He didn't laugh at that time. It's only funny in retrospect, isn't it, Greg? But Representative Fox came to me and told me how we could apply this money and what a difference it could make. Well, I don't know how to work a computer even, so I wasn't as impressed maybe as some of our other colleagues here. But as he articulated a vision for our young people to be world competitive in the future, so that they would have the opportunity in business and industry and education and all the areas that Ohio has been a leading state in. When he talked about that, you could see a love for the young people of this state, a concern for them that may not have been unique, but boy, it sure was special. And that just came right out spontaneously. And he knew better than to try to sell me on big spending, but that came out as a matter of love from Mike Fox. I was interested that C.J. Prentice from Cuyahoga County mentioned that somebody who was liked by everyone, might be someone who hadn't really done very much. And I think you hold the record for my not speaking to people. There are those, as a matter of fact, who couldn't believe I wouldn't be able to speak to somebody for a day, let alone a long period of time. Mike, in Medina County this November, we have an issue on the ballot for our TID, for our Transportation Infrastructure District. And we have that there because of you. And we have that there because of the contribution that you made, because he foresaw 10 years before the Highway Department finally announced nothing else was going to happen. Before that, he saw that coming and knew that local people with peculiar problems, Medina's growth, Butler County's growth, would have to deal with those problems locally, which makes me happy anyway, deal with them locally. And at the end of the day, I guess the thing that I would have to say about Mike that has meant the most to me is the fact that he and I have a similar vision of this House, of what this House means to the people of the state of Ohio, about the idea that any member with any idea ought to be allowed to get on the floor and present that idea, even though they're the only person in the place who believes in it, because it's important that ideas get thrashed out here. This is the people's house. This is where the ideas should come from. I've almost forgotten the newspaper interview, Mike, where they were writing a story about you, I think in the Enquirer, and they said, "Don't you really think Mike's his own worst enemy?" And at that time, having a different view of you, I said, "Not as long as I'm alive." Ladies and gentlemen, we've been fortunate to have a man that brings passion to the floor of this House. He brings passion to his committee. He'll take passion to Butler County. And I am very, very confident that all of us will look back on our service over all of these years with Mike Fox, thankfully. And most important, there will be young people all over Ohio who will never have heard of him in spite of how important we think we are, who will be the beneficiaries of his courage, his work, and indeed his passion. Thank you, Speaker.
Question is, should the letter of resignation be accepted? Mike, I don't know what to say at this particular point in time. Let me tell you, I've watched the gallery as this discussion of accepting your letter has gone on, and kind of slowly watched the people leave who wanted to be sure you were leaving. And now that they're convinced that you are, they have wandered on off to lunch. And then I've watched other people stay there through the whole discussion, like our budget director, Greg Browning, who Representative Batchelder mentioned, who's, I know, one of your closest friends, and who's worked very closely with you, and a number of other people there in the gallery who have worked with you through the years. Let me just say that when you're with a leader, you're the answer to a leader's prayer.